How's it going? And welcome to episode 184 of On the Wire. Proud member of the Pitcher List Podcast Network. Follow the pod on the Twitter and on the YouTube at On the Wire Pod. I am Adam Howe. You can follow me at 80 grade. That's all spelled out. Kevin Hasting can be followed at Hasting Kevin. We've got a great show lined up for you once again as we get into the off-season gear, Kevin. We talked about 2024 surprises in a positive light. Let's turn that on its head this week and talk about some disappointments. And that can be construed in a lot of different ways, but ultimately it's, players that you expected to do one thing and they literally just did not do that one thing that you wanted them to do. And we'll go category by category. But besides that, Kevin, it is the middle of the sixth inning. Your Royals have an elimination game. I feel bad that when we record, the Royals have not done well. So we maybe should have moved this recording day. We're recording this on Thursday. Hopefully they turn us around and we can celebrate together because I'm rooting for your Royals at the same time. How you doing?
I'm doing all right. Yeah, well, the Royals have really had one good inning this entire series offensively. So I don't know if us recording has much to do with it or not. They did just get out of the sixth, turning a double play, keeping it a 3-run deficit. So hope is not all lost yet, but it's getting there. We got 4 innings to go and down 2-1 in a 5-game series. So they got to do something quickly.
Yeah. And it's too bad this might happen at home as well. Like they're in Kansas City. It's like one of those things where it's like, I'm just happy to be there. At the same time, it's like they've been there before. And honestly, they have, as many championships in this century as the Yankees do. So we might as well, kind of run with that. Hopefully they can pull this out and we'll be keeping an eye on that scoreboard. The other side of the American League is all tied up as of today. We got the Guardians cleaning up against the Tigers. I don't say cleaning up. They won by 1 run with a nice Class A save at the end. So it's nice to see at least one of these series go to the 5th game. We'll see the other one go to the 5th game tomorrow with the Padres and Dodgers all tied up at 2. Who's starting that for the Dodgers? Have you seen? I only see the announcement of Darvish on the Padres side, but the bullpen game yesterday kind of threw everything off for me.
Yeah, it's they may do it again. I think this is we're getting to this point in postseason baseball. It's not even the other than the elite of the elite guys. We're not seeing starters go deep into games.
Sure.
I mean, even Cole Reagans, even Seth Lugo, even Garrett Cole in game 1, he's doing much better tonight. He's only at 61 pitches in the 6th. That's part of the problem for the Royals right now. But other than performances like we're seeing from Garrett Cole right now, it's just not something we see much anymore.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's besides the inefficiency, which is what you're alluding to, obviously. I think it's a part of it is also a little bit by design in the playoffs. When you get into these short series, you just want to put 110% out there for every single inning. And so you have starters that normally go 6 innings and you can tell them, hey, you're only going to go 4. Give me the 4 best innings you've ever thrown. And then we can really lean on the bullpen to go even sometimes like 1 inning or even sometimes just the minimum batters that they have to face. They're getting off days. These are short series. And even though, a couple teams had to play some, extra games or at least had less off time due to the replacement games. I'm talking obviously with the Mets and Atlanta doing their doubleheader on that Monday. I think a little bit by design. Do you think that there's anything to that, or are you just expecting to see if a starter is being super efficient, why would you take them out?
No, I think they're doing it right, and they would do it all season long if it was possible, but it's not. Your bullpen would you'd kill your bullpen. They wouldn't make it through the season. Otherwise, this is the best way to try to win a baseball game.
Yeah, and with these, best of 3, best of 5 series, that's basically what you're trying. That's what you're doing. Best of 7, again, it's you always see that meme around this time of year. It was not a meme, but whatever, the screenshot of like what baseball would have to do to match the NBA's like percentage of like
A 70-game series. Yeah.
best of 71. That would be.
I was looking at Kyle Bland's cool app he put out there where you can put in the two teams and it gives you the percentages based on how many games the series would be.
Yep.
And one of them that I looked at, it was I just put in Astros Royals for fun because I figured that would be pretty even. And absolutely, and the difference between a 3-game series and an 11-game series is less than 2 percentage points
Yeah, exactly.
in the outcome. It takes a lot of games in baseball.
Unless you're throwing something like out there like it's White Sox versus Dodgers, then maybe that comes down a little bit more. Sure, when they're not as evenly matched. That would have been an interesting one to throw into the little machine that one of the very many machines that Kyle throws out there like on a whim.
Yeah, somebody has a question in the Discord, and
there's an app for that.
He writes a new app for it in 10 minutes, and we got the answer.
Yeah. Take that, Apple App Store. If somebody's going to make an app for it, it's going to be Kyle at this point. At least if it's baseball related. So keep them coming, Kyle, all off season. While Kyle is busy doing other things like participating in this mock draft. I mentioned this last week. It's really cool because he is doing this mock draft with us. He had the first overall pick, but he is, he's supposed to be drafting solely on his PLV projection rankings. And so he's made some fun picks. So you have to keep an ear out for when he has to defend those picks. On the Corner podcast, every podcast that is represented in this mock draft will be doing an interview with Nick Pollock on the Corner podcast throughout the off season. Once we finish this up, they'll get started. So keeping an ear out for when Kyle has to defend those picks as well. We made some fun picks. You made a comment to me earlier in the week when our pick was going to come up in about 5 or 6 picks that there was some interesting pitchers being taken in the draft. Now, this is a mock draft. This is definitely for fun. It's early in the off season. But at the same time, it's also formatted in a Yahoo standard format. So it's very different than like the NFBC formats that we would typically be drafting actual leagues in at this point. There's no corners. There's no middle infielders. There's 2 utility spots, but otherwise there's a single spot for every other offensive position. And then there's like 9 pitchers. And so that is similar enough, at least. So it's a deeper bench, it's a deeper free agent pool after it's all said and done. There's only 3 outfielders as well. So interesting mix of players that are being picked, and I'm not saying interesting in such a way where it's not a lot of like the number of pitchers taken or the number of first basemen or what have you. Though there's been plenty of comments in the chat about what we talked about last week, and you brought up about how second base is less than ideal. Garbage, I think, was the term that you might have used.
Pretty close.
Yeah. And so we went after that early on by grabbing Ozzy Albies, assuming he'll be coming back at 110%. But all these comments are being made after like the 4th or 5th second baseman come off the board. But the pitchers that were still available or that were being drafted while our pick, Jacob DeGrom was still available. And this was the 12 team in the 6th round, the back end of the 6th round. So we grabbed DeGrom. And then after coming around the turn at the 3rd pick in the 7th round, again, this is Yahoo. So Shohei Ohtani is 2 players. He was picked in the 1st round as a hitter. So he was still available as a pitcher as he comes back from Tommy John, and looked like, there was a very, very slight chance that he actually might be available in the playoffs in a bullpen role. I think that's already been squashed before the playoffs even started. But even the fact that rumor actually started gives me even that much more confidence that he'll be, good to go to start opening day. Now, what kind of workload he is given, as long as he comes back at like 85 to 90% of what we saw him do in his last full season, extremely confident that he can still throw. He can throw 140, 150 innings and still get you production out of, that you would normally see out of 190 innings. I made that pick on my own without consulting you afterwards, but what's your overall thought on in those types of leagues where Ohtani is going to be pitching separately from as a hitter, like in Yahoo and other various platforms? What's your expectation on him?
Yeah, we got him as the 16th starting pitcher off the board, and I think that's a nice value. We're probably looking at what I would think when we get into draft season. We see him in a spring training game, see that he is pitching and he's fine, and he's coming back 5 days later and pitching again while he's continuing to hit. But I really think he's going to probably be right around top 10. Yeah, top 10-ish is where I'd probably see him landing once we start seeing some projections and see him on the field throwing. So, yeah, I think we got a good pick there. And Kyle with the PL bot got the other pitcher we had been talking about at the time in between our two pitcher picks. So all three went right there together. So it made sense.
There's still one more. We'll get to him a little bit later on in this show, so I'll leave that one as a little bit of a tease. But I really want to drill this in here. Talking about Ohtani, we're talking about drafting him here in a separated league where you separate him out as a pitcher and a hitter. How often are you, if you draft Ohtani in an NFBC format or any other format where he's one player and you get to pick and choose, especially in a weekly format? We saw how powerful he can be as a pitcher, and now we've obviously seen maybe the peak of what he can do as a hitter, and that's not going away. Either one of those is probably not going away. How often do you foresee yourself using him as a pitcher over a hitter in any given week in that kind of a format?
It's going to be the 2 start weeks that are
Will
few and
he
far
get any
between,
2-start
especially.
weeks? That'll
Yeah,
be
he might, right? Typically, even if it's every 6th a day, he won't get as many as if he's going on a typical 5-man rotation. But if they do every 6th day, even he's going to have a couple. You're going to have the short week to start the season. He's obviously going to pitch in one of the first 3 games of the season. You're going to coming out of the All-Star break. He probably gets a start that short week. So Phil Dussault last offseason talked about this quite a bit. At least I heard he would be asked about it every time I heard him on a podcast. And it's math, right? So if you throw him during the short weeks and his 2 start weeks and use him as a hitter all of the other weeks, you get something like 16% of his starts and 90% of his hitting. That's over 100% of playing time. So you are getting a bonus if you do it that way. You're getting most of his hitting, but those few starts you get out of him just by using them when basically it's 2 for the week, 1.5 week being the same pace. So I think that's pretty simple. Also, in a pinch, especially this comes into play in draft champions, right? Where we start having times during the year where we may not even have healthy guys to get into our lineup. Having that flexibility, I can use Ohtani as a pitcher, even though I think it's easier to find a UT than it is an ace late in the season when you need one.
Yeah, I think this is the toughest part for just on the surface without looking into the weekly matchups, without looking into the availability on the wire and what you have to work with. And I think I'm echoing a lot of what Uncle Ted's talking about in our little chat here. It's so like you're just gonna miss out. Like if you throw him in as a pitcher and any given week, he could hit 2 or 3 bombs in the week. He could steal 2 or 3 bases, and you're just not going to get those. Now, if you can put in the time and you can put in the effort and you can find the best matchups to at least replicate or replace that kind of possible production in your UT spot in that given week, you should sleep better at night. Like you should feel good about that. You didn't actually lose out on it. You actually got the bonus. The numbers don't lie, as you were talking about with Phil Dussault's comments a couple off seasons ago. But I think it's just seeing those numbers on your bench, quote unquote, on the surface is hard. It's just hard it's a hard pill to swallow. Even though the production that you'll get out of him as a pitcher can be just as valuable, if not more so, in comparison. And I think you nailed it. It's like you can fill that UT spot, or at least you can get replacement level value in that UT spot easier than you can get the pitcher replacement value that he can actually bring to the table, assuming he's healthy and he's getting those starts. Yeah, I mean, anytime that he's starting and you scheduled to start on a Monday, I mean, it should be an auto start for in your pitching slot, almost regardless of the matchups. You just got to do your research and get the right replacement in there in your UT spot. Another thing to think about when you're drafting and you have to make that decision, I'm assuming we're going to see Ohtani going number 1 overall in just about, every league, to start the season. And when you are put in that situation, he's on your team from the get-go, you've got to adjust your drafting accordingly throughout your draft, knowing that you basically have to have a backup pitcher and a backup a decent bat on your first bench spot, just so you'll be making those adjustments throughout the course of the season. Interesting topic. Again, we talked about this last week, and we're going to talk about it all off season. We get to talk about players we don't normally get to talk about, Kevin. So sometimes we might continue to go on little tangents regarding all that, especially when it comes to, we don't want to belittle like the first round talk. We don't want to do that. We don't want to drive that into the ground, because I feel like there are going to be plenty of podcasts that start talking about the first and second round, and that's all they talk about. But we never get to talk about these guys. So give us a little bit. All right. Bear with us. All right. Well, like I said at the beginning of the show, let's talk about many of the guys we're going to talk about here did go in the first, 5, 6, 7, maybe even 10 rounds of your drafts last year. I'll be referencing ADP once again as I look at last year's ADP as we talk about these players. But the whole idea here, Kevin, is we wanted to talk about players that ultimately disappointed us. And there's no, exact science to this. It's not like, hey, they provided us with X amount of value, but we drafted them at Y spot. It's not an exact science. It's more of, hey, we thought we were going to get something out of them that we did not see. And so that's where we want to see. We want to get a feel of how we feel they're going to do this next year. It's like, is this the new normal? Should we be expecting more of the same? Is this a downturn in their careers? Or is this just like, hey, they were hurt. We expect them to come back, et cetera, et cetera. So we'll get into all of that right after this quick break. All right, we are back. You are still listening to On the Wire. Thank you so much for joining us during the offseason, during the playoffs. Kevin, your Royals have scored a run. They are now down by 2, top of the 7th here. So that's good to see, inching their way back up. At the very least, if this goes into extra innings, I'll be ecstatic. So you're rooting for that at least. So we're gonna talk about some disappointing players, and we're gonna do this the same way we did the last show, the same way we do every show during the season. We're gonna go category by category, or at least groupings of categories, right? As we hit up our hitting categories first, guys that disappointed us in the power categories. These are guys that we drafted. Maybe you expected 5 categories out of them. That's fine. But where they really disappointed us was in the power expectations, the home runs, the RBIs, what you expected out of them, and then what the final line. And that's really what matters here, right? We're basing this on a roto situation, not so much a head-to-head, where that final line is really what matters. Maybe they were hurt. Maybe you had to keep them on your bench for a long time. Maybe they were hurt enough or they weren't in production that you actually had to drop them. Whatever the case may be, they did not get you what you were hoping to get. So you got 2 names on here. So I'm going to let you lead off the power category. I only have one that really stood out to me that I want to talk about. So lead us off with pick your poison. Who do you want to single out first?
I'm going to go with the one that won't surprise many people that he made our list to start out, and that's Julio Rodriguez. No secret that he had a down year compared to what we were expecting, a top 5 draft pick in many leagues, and only hit 20 home runs. And he played 143 games, over 600 plate appearances, 20 home runs. Uh, Big drop from the 32 he had last season. Now he had about 100 more plate appearances last year, but he had 60% more home runs last year. Big jump. Yeah, he had 28 in his rookie season in over 50 less plate appearances than he had the 20 in 2024. So the power was way down at 136 ISO, barely over 400 slugging percentage. This just doesn't make sense when after what we've seen the first 2 seasons of Julio Rodriguez's career. And the only thing really, I mean, yeah, his barrel percentage is down slightly, from 11.9% on Fangraphs to 10.2%. Hard hit rate down slightly, but still approaching 50%. It was all still there. But what I noticed is his pull percentage. Um, Almost 6.5 percentage points. He dropped from 42% last season and 41.7% his rookie season. So just about identical his first 2 years, down to just 35.6%. And that's going to zap power when you're not pulling the ball as much. So yes, he's only 23 years old. I would think this is something that he can remedy, that this is something that he'll take care of this offseason. But it's definitely something to keep in mind when we're drafting for 2025. I've been seeing him go at the 1-2 turn in 15 team leagues so far. That's interesting. I forget where he went in our 12 team mock draft. I'm looking here really quickly. Yeah, he was the 14th pick. So in about the same spot. He was the second pick of the second round, coming back. And so I don't know. This is something to monitor in spring training. I think there's some things we can look at in spring training. Typically, we like to stick to base on ball and strikeout percentages, both hitters and pitchers mainly. But I'm going to be curious to see if Julio Rodriguez is pulling the ball. If he's not, then I don't think I'm going to be interested at that 1-2 turn. He'd have to drop further for me.
Yeah, interesting. If you look at his, the rolling process plus chart on Julio Rodriguez for this year, especially when you compare it to last year, his power's fine. Like at least from all of those metrics that go into that, his power's well above average, especially as the season rolled on. It got to a peak right before getting injured, and it continued after he came back as well. Where he's really struggling were those decision making skills that he, obviously had a very positive. And I do wonder if that has a lot to do with the decision not to pull the ball, like not to do the right thing with the pitches that he's seeing that would have provided, the better outcome. And that's the whole idea of PLV is like, what decision, like, what are you doing with the pitches that you're presented with? Are you making contact on pitches that should be, compared to major league average, should be making contact with? Are you swinging at a pitch that you should be swinging at versus, swinging at pitches? Even if you do something well with a pitch that ultimately you shouldn't be swinging at, that's still going to provide you with the bad decision. Because you could just be that good of a hitter, obviously. But Julio Rodriguez arguably is, that much better of a hitter than MLB average. But to see his decision value be so low, well below major league average throughout the season, and there was only about 1 or 2 days where it, crept up above major league average. It makes me wonder if it had a lot to do with just deciding to not put, like, was it a decision to not pull the ball as often, and thus obviously not getting the same kind of results, even though when he was getting results, the power was there. He just wasn't getting as much of it because of the decisions that he was deciding to make. And I just think I used like a version of the word decide way too many times in like one long rant. So I apologize for that. So yeah, I'm gonna throw out what I thought was an easy one because I'm just curious to know if this is finally, what's the phrase, like the chickens have come home to rest, rooster, whatever that phrase is. And I'm talking about Adolis Garcia. We talk about it every season, whether or not this is the end. Is this like he can't keep doing this, right? That whole meme. Whereas like all the underlining numbers say that he can, just will fall off at some point. And it's not as though he was not valuable in 2024. But when we see him hit 39 home runs in 600 plus plate appearances, we expect him to do somewhere near the same, and for him to shy of I think it was 25 home runs by the end of the season in plenty of with plenty of opportunities to do better. This is just, it's got to be disappointing for anybody who kept hanging their hat on Adolis Garcia to continue to drive the ball as hard as he has been and be able to make something, some would say make something out of nothing, based on those underlying metrics. Is this just like everything kind of coming back to where a lot of people expected it to happen at some point, Kevin? Or is this something he can, you expect him to come back to that, the 30 plus home run mark of yesteryear?
Yeah, this is interesting, and because most, if not all, of the underlying numbers are the same that they've been for 4 seasons now. In fact, he held his strikeout rates that he had improved the past couple of seasons. Getting down to that 27% now for 3 straight seasons, rather than the 31% that it was in 2021 when he first broke out and gave us 31 home runs. And that was uh the big red flag, right? Is, oh, guys like this don't age well. And sorry, Kyle Isbell just hit one to the wall that would have tied the game for the
Oh
third out of the
man.
7th inning. To the wall. Sorry about that. But the strikeout rate, 3 seasons now, 27.9, 27.7, 27.8. That's been the worry, and he brought that down, 3+ percentage points from that 2021, and it's still there. His BABIP about the same as it was last season. His walk rate was down slightly, but still higher than it was in 21 and 22. Everything is the same here. His O swing is what I wanted to look at, see if he's chasing a little more. It does not appear. He up more than last season, but less than 21 and 22 when he was hitting over 30 home runs. So I think what I'm getting out of this is I would expect at least, I think that his 2024 is his floor in 2025, and he could get back to 2021 and 2022. 2023, the 39 home runs, he went on some crazy streaks in 2023, if you'll remember, like hitting 7 home runs in 3 or 4 days, a time
Right.
or two throughout the season. So I wasn't expecting that. But I think we can get back to 2021 and 2022, and we're probably going to see him fall a little further in drafts than he did in 2024, because people are going to be worried, right? The extreme example of someone like is Javi Baez, right? Once that swing and miss really starts taking over, it's hard to come back from. But he hasn't done that, at least as far as strikeout percentage is concerned.
Yeah, I mean, I was, while you're talking about that, it made me think about like, well, all the underlying metrics that you mentioned are similar or the same in many cases, right? So it makes me think maybe pitchers are just getting wiser. Like maybe he's just not seeing as good of pitches as he might have seen. But if going back just even over the last 2.5 or over the last 3 seasons now, his pitch hit ability that he's seeing on average is well below Major League Baseball average. So like he's been seeing bad pitches or unhittable pitches for his entire career, really, when it comes down to it, at least for the last couple of seasons. consistently. There's been some peaks over the course of like 2 or 3 weeks that, all of a sudden he was just maybe that court. I have to check the timeline to see that might correlate with those 7 home runs in like 3 games type of streaks that we saw. But it's interesting. It's like, it's not as though pitchers are throwing him anything better or worse on a consistent basis. It just did not come to fruition this year. And all those metrics you were talking about might have been consistent, but the actual production was shown in his Process Plus chart as being extremely down compared to the year before. Like all his power metrics were down in that realm. His decision value and his contact were all right around or right below major league average. Is always the power that really held up the positive attributes that he brought to the table in general. But it's just interesting. It's just the production was more correlated with the actual Process Plus metrics than the flat lines underlying metrics that you were talking about. All right, I said earlier that like a couple of these all really turned out to be the players that we're talking about here. It really comes down to their final value of their final line of 2024, regardless of what the reason was. Injury obviously going to play a part in this, and I think that had a big part about with the second guy you wanted to bring up here.
Yeah, and even pre-injury, Mookie Betts. I alluded to this a little bit last week when we were talking about surprises in a good way. I was surprised that Mookie Betts, in spite of the injury, it seemed like he was out longer. He still accumulated over 500 plate appearances, 516. 19 home runs and 16 stolen bases in a little over 500 plate appearances is pretty darn good for most people, but I don't consider it very good for Mookie Betts, who had 39 home runs last season and 35 in 2022. Maybe we can't expect him to repeat the career high, but I did not expect him to hit less than half the number of home runs, especially when he had those 516 plate appearances I was talking about. And the most intriguing thing to all of this is I went to Mookie's Baseball Savant page, and our new metric on Baseball Savant from earlier this season, bat speed, 13th percentile. Now, here's the problem. We don't have anything to compare that to.
Yeah.
But I would be willing to bet that Mookie Betts the previous 2 seasons was well above 13th percentile in bat speed.
I think
so that's going to be what I'm going to try to keep an eye on next year. Now that we do have this, and it is something we can look at, is I'm going to be really curious to see Mookie Betts' bat speed next season, because if it doesn't move up, then he's still going mid first round, and he's probably a first rounder. But he's going to be 33 years old. Bats slow down, and if that is what caused is what zapped his power this season, I'm going to be leery of this.
Yeah, how many he should keep the triple eligibility going in even in NFB formats, right? How many outfield starts did he end up with at the end of the season? As I'm trying to
I can look really quick here. The last I heard, it was going to be tough for him to keep the shortstop eligibility, and he was going to have second base. Oh, he only has 18 games at second base in 2024.
Yeah, and he had 40
So
some odd
he is
games
shortstop and outfield, not second base any longer.
Oh,
So
that's
just going to hurt second base even more.
Yeah. Yeah, so obviously he keeps that second base eligibility in the formats that require less of a plateau, like
5, 10s, and 15 as the minimum, but not 20.
No, so I mean, he could very easily get the 10 that is needed in season to gain it back, assuming that they keep him at second base going into 2025. So maybe less of a concern, but you'll have to wait at least through the first full week of the season to see that happen. I think a good call out there, because this is still a guy that anytime. The whole adage is that you can't win your league in the first round, but you can totally lose it. by through no fault of your own. Mookie Betts, top 5 pick in most drafts last year, especially due to the eligibility. Definitely wasn't, didn't provide you with that kind of production that went on. I'd be interested to see how many leagues out there who started off their drafts with Mookie Betts ended up still winning their league. A lot of other things had to have gone right in that situation, unfortunately.
Mhm.
All right. A lot of power to talk about. Let's move on to some speed disappointments, Kevin. As if I can get my mouse to actually do what I ask it to do. So let's get we've got again, you got 2 names on here. I got one that stood out to me, so I'm gonna let you lead us off here. Which one do you want to spotlight first?
Yeah, well, this one's really quick. I mentioned this last week as well, briefly, but really wanted to bring it up here. JT Realmuto, right? Gets drafted where he does because he can provide stolen bases from the catcher position, and even if it's just 10 to 15, that's a big advantage over most other catchers, giving you, 10 more stolen bases that other people aren't getting from that position. So it can help a lot. He only had 2 in 2024, and he was caught twice. So he was only successful 50% of the time. This is probably we're probably not going to see double-digit stolen bases out of JT Realmuto anymore. He's a 33-year-old catcher. He'll be 34 before the start of the 2025 season. So I do not expect to see stolen bases from JT Realmuto going forward. Maybe more than the 2 that he had in 2024, but I don't expect double digits any longer.
Yeah, this is interesting. We're going to talk. I mean, just picking out a catcher in this situation is telling because it's like you expect a certain amount of volume too, especially in the runs category. And to throw a catcher in there, they must have really hit a snag if you're discussing them in this category. So, good call up there. I threw out there a guy that I drafted in a couple places just due to the multi-position eligibility, and then also what we saw him do on the base pass. And this is mostly a steal situation on a good team where he was going to be at the top of the order. Of course, I'm talking about Hung Sung Kim of the San Diego Padres. And a lot of this obviously is with the missed time, especially in the second half of the season, not able to get to the volume. He still stole 22 bases, but he stole close to 40 bases last year in 620 plus plate appearances. So he is still on pace to do that, if not more, throughout this course of the season. But it's very disappointing to see him miss so much time and not get to that plateau of plate appearances to actually provide you with the volume that you really needed out of this position or out of his skill set. He wasn't quite a 2020 or a 2030 last year, 17 home runs. So you weren't drafting him for the power. He probably still provided you with as much power as you kind of could have expected. So this wasn't a disappointment in that realm. It was more of I needed the volume so he could get more opportunities to steal more bases, and of course, still only scoring 60 runs in that lineup. Again, the per plate appearance, great, that's fine. But we're talking about what that final line ended up being for you with this player, where you ended up drafting him. Was a little disappointing to me in the places that I did have him, and just want to double check where he actually, was being drafted toward the end of last year. He was, ADP of 76, so he's definitely a top 75 type of player being drafted. Do you expect this type of like final line, Kevin, to kind of hold him at that same spot or even push him down further in drafts as people kind of like, especially early on in the offseason where you're just looking for the guys that really produced, especially in those top 100 picks? Or do you think that, he'll be coming back? People are expecting him to come back at 110% and go right back to where he was in 2023 with total numbers.
It's gonna be intriguing. My guess is he does fall a little bit, probably not too far. Just 1 season removed from from stealing 38 bases, but it's going to be intriguing to see because once again, as with some other guys we've talked about already in this show, much of what he did throughout the season looks very similar. And you're right, he missed time. So that probably had something to do with his stolen base attempts when he was in there. Because he barely got to half the amount of stolen bases he had the previous year, and he did have 470 plate appearances, played in 121 games. So it does appear that when he got caught 5 times, um, 22 for 27, not bad. We're at that 80% there. So it's yeah, I think it was he didn't attempt as many. Well,
Sure.
obviously he did not, but I think that has a lot to do with it. Even prorated for the amount of games he played, he did not attempt as many stolen bases. And but his hard hits right there, his BABIP was down to where it was in 2021, leading his batting average to be lower than it was in 22 and 23, his on base percentage to be lower than it was in 22, or in 23 anyway. It was still a little higher than in 2022, but back then that was before the rules change. Haesung Kim is someone that definitely took advantage of the rules changes in Major League Baseball, stealing many more bases in 23 than 22. But it I think he is gonna fall a little bit, and I think it was probably injury related, and we get the attempts back in 2025. So, he's probably somebody to keep an eye on, especially if he drops further than we think he might.
I mean, I also want to ask you how much of his value last year was caught not only in that 38 stolen bases, but in three position eligibility. This year, going into 2025, he's only going to have shortstop eligibility in every platform. He only played shortstop this year. In those 470 plate appearances, didn't even make an appearance at second base or third base with Xander Bogaerts over there, and obviously Machado doing most of the work over at third base. And obviously, him being injured, Kim, that is, took away some opportunity or time to move around. Now that he's lost those two extra positions, being eligible at them, how much does that also attest for his probable drop in ADP throughout this offseason compared to last? Do you think?
Yeah, especially early, because that position eligibility is a huge advantage in the draft champions leagues, which is typically what we see a lot of people that draft early, drafting those types of leagues, and so that the lack of position eligibility or losing it is going to be a big deal in those formats.
Yeah, agreed. All right, so you got another one on here. It's funny. This is the first guy that I think that we're throwing out there with an ADP last year of more than so far more than 76. For Kim being the low man so far, you're gonna blow it out of the water with an ADP of 296. This is a March only ADP that I'm quoting, by the way. So all drafts that happened on NFBC last March of 2024. 296 ADP here. How could that possibly have been a disappointment in anything when you're getting him close to that 300 mark?
Well, it's all about
Yeah.
all of his value, and the reason he was drafted even as high as he was due to the stolen bases, and that's what we're looking at here. And he excuse me there. I was looking up at the Royals game again.
Yeah. It's
He
going to be hard
he
not
he
to.
had he had 19 less stolen bases in over 200 more plate appearances, played in 34 more games, and his stolen bases dropped from 33. Now, maybe we didn't expect 30 out of him again, but I'm guessing most people that drafted Willie Castro were penciling him in for at least 20, probably 25 stolen bases. And to only get 14 it is a big deal. Now his home runs did go up a little bit, but when you're talking 12 12 home runs, 14 stolen bases, that that's that's just not enough unless you're doing something great. And the one thing he did close to great was score runs, the 89. That's what saved him his season for those that were using him throughout 2024 was the close to 90 runs scored and then the double digit home runs and stolen bases. But I have to think anybody drafting Willie Castro was expecting 25 plus stolen bases here.
Yeah, the only concern with Castro was going to be possible playing time, and he obviously gave you that in spades. 635 plate appearances versus the 409 that he needed to get to that 33 mark on the stolen baseline last season. And so for him to get well above his playing time from last year, this year, from 2023 versus 2024, very surprising to see, to not get to anywhere close to where he finished the season in stolen bases last year. Now, this is a combo
He
category.
was getting caught.
And
You
yeah,
know,
so it's like
he
when
was
you
only
get caught
10
that
out of
often,
17 in the first half. So
yeah,
they only allowed him to attempt 6 in the
yeah,
second half.
you basically dig your own grave when you fail that often. So
Yes.
you can't blame Twins for the decision making there. All right, we got we got through our power, we got through our speed, we got some opportunity to talk about on the hitting side here. We're gonna do that after this quick break. All right, Kevin, we took our breaks in a little weird spot here, but that's just how the timing works out. And we're staying in our hitters. Usually we move into pitchers here. We're going to stay in our hitters. We got some opportunities here. I'm gonna lead us off here because I just made a switch on where I put some names because I mean there was one name I thought about earlier on today that I don't know why I didn't type it in here. So I got a pair of catchers in here. One of them, it was a disappointment to me because I had him in more than a few places. And it just seemed so frustrating throughout the season. But it was somebody you would never take out of your lineup. This is Adley Rutschman. It is like when he finished last season, with a 277 average, with as many at bats and plate appearances as he can provide from the catcher position. That's a big deal. That's like extremely useful at 277. And so when he finished the season at 250, still again playing just about every day. There was a little stint I feel like in August where he was missing every like fourth or fifth game, and they were like just trying to take it easy on him a little bit. But overall, for him to drop 27 points in batting average with that amount of plate appearances that he puts it like with the amount of at bats he puts it forward, that becomes a lot more powerful in a less than positive way than what I was hoping for or expecting out of that catcher position. And when you draft somebody as your C1, in most cases, in a lot of cases, he was the C1 drafted off of a lot of boards. You really would expected to get a little bit more out of that. And we're talking opportunity here. We're talking about number of plate appearances, playing time overall, and then of course the impact on batting average, the impact batting averages has based on that playing time. We could be talking about the other guy on the other end of the spectrum, Sean Murphy, very, very much the opposite. It's like just did not get that playing time. We're not quite sure what Atlanta was doing with him for a while. And for him to not produce in the volume that you kind of expected, even with Travis d'Arnaud there, kind of quote sharing time. You never expected it to be a 50-50, especially with the effort that Atlanta went to acquire Sean Murphy as their catcher, not only of today but also of the future. I knew, from his Atlanta days that Sean Murphy had some injury concerns. He had some back issues, and obviously something like that really came to fruition. And Atlanta was trying to, manage that situation the best they could with playing time. But from a fantasy perspective, very disappointing because I'm sure I didn't actually have a lot. I had some Sean Murphys here or there, and it was really disappointing when I feel like I finally had to pull the trigger to not only drop him down from C1 to C2, but in many cases, he went from C2 to the free agent pool. There's just not a bat that I could sustain on certain rosters. Are these two guys that you, especially at the catcher position, that you had anywhere that you kind of felt this firsthand? Or is this something you kind of just noticed from afar?
Yeah, I had Sean Murphy on a couple of dynasty teams and then picked him up late after he had been dropped in many places when he was out injured and had been underperforming as well. So, yeah, the you know, we expected, or I should say, we did not expect Sean Murphy to continue to get over 600 plate appearances when he was traded to Atlanta. And in 2023, the same batting average and more home runs, even though he did have almost 200 less plate appearances, played in 108 games. There was a couple injuries. He was on fire for the first half of 2023. Got injured and wasn't the same, and wasn't the same this year either, even when in the lineup and healthy. 10 home runs and 264 plate appearances is good. I mean, that's
Fine.
right on
Yeah.
pace for the 21 that he had in 2023. But just yeah, the playing time was not there even when he was back healthy, like you alluded to. It was kind of confusing. Yeah, Travis d'Arnaud had some decent games and a couple of nice streaks, so it was understandable when he was in there then. But then when he'd cool off, Sean Murphy wasn't wasn't back in there then either.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was very perplexing. It was he was tough to roster. Absolutely.
Yeah. And I don't think it's going to change much next year. And the Rollins just said that, recently that the Atlanta plans on exercising d'Arnaud's team option on his 2025 contract. And so d'Arnaud will be back with Atlanta for the 2025 season. Obviously, Murphy will continue to be there. They've got him under control at least through 2028. If not, then they have a club option for 2029. So this is going to, I'm assuming I'm going to see more of the same from both of these catchers. I don't know that maybe one of them becomes a viable very late round C2, but I don't know that this is a situation that I want to invest in at all.
Yep.
All right, so let's get away from catchers then, Kevin. You got somebody better to talk about that I think is a little bit more interesting because people love talk. I know if you're not Casey Bubba, you don't love necessarily talking about catchers. So let's move on to a different position. What's the name you got on here in the opportunity section?
Yeah, this is kind of confusing to me. I understand he's got some fairly heavy platoon splits throughout his career. They almost look reverse in 2024. I know there's not enough plate appearances to look at that, but it's just confusing to me that Harrison Bader played in 143 games and only had 437 plate appearances. So he was taken out of games he started, and many of those games he played, he did not start. So it was a little surprising to me that he was used in the matchups that often. If you told me before the season that we were going to get 143 games played out of Harrison Bader, I would have expected at least 550 plate appearances.
Yeah, I think Bader's another interest. Right along the lines with Willie Castro, as I was just double checking because I had to look at this number twice. ADP in March of last year at 367. And so this was an absolute free draft pick in just about any league format, 12s, 15s, what have you. But what we've seen him been able to do with the playing time it's been very valuable. It's just obviously not something anybody drafting him expected. It was like more of a lottery ticket, but a lottery ticket that you knew you could cash if given the opportunity, and the fact that he did not see that kind of opportunity, regardless of where he was playing, was obviously a disappointment. Hence the title of the show. All right, we will stream right into the pitchers here. I didn't even do that on purpose. Yes, we're going to stream into the pitchers. And I'm going to throw out, as we talk about our volume categories to start here, Kevin, with wins and Ks, I'm going to throw out my low-hanging fruit that just had to be picked because this was the other player that you had suggested. I'm surprised that he's still on the board in this mock draft we're doing just because of the format, just because of the name recognition and what he can actually do if healthy for an entire season. I'm talking about Spencer Strider, who had to have been the biggest disappointment of the drafts from last year in any capacity. He went first overall in more than a handful of drafts, especially as we got closer and closer to the season. And obviously as we double checked, we had to, do the whole double check thing again. Started how many games? 2 games last year. And obviously did not get you the wins or the strikeouts or anything else that you were hoping for out of your, SP1, never mind your top 3 overall pick in your draft. So this goes to the question really revolves around how much are we trusting to draft somebody like Spencer Strider? And there's more than a handful of pitchers that are coming back next year who missed the entire or most of 2024 that were aces. Like we were without Sandy Alcantara. We were without Shane McClanahan. We were without Spencer Strider. We were without, even the Robbie Rays of the world, Kevin. He's still going to be very much so draftable going into next year. We were without a whole lot of like very good pitchers through 2024. And we're going to see them. Tyler Mahle could arguably be, one of those names as well. We're going to see them ready to go to start Ohtani. We're gonna see them ready to go to start 2025 or early on. Spencer Strider being one of those possibly ready for opening day. Obviously, there's been some mixed messages there, but like, how much stock should we be putting into the returns of these types of players, Strider especially?
Yeah, so Strider in particular, the quotes from the Rangers are very intriguing.
Atlanta.
Oh, yeah, from Atlanta. Excuse me.
Another one.
Rangers for the next guy. The Rangers for the guy that's pulled up in front of me as I talk about Spencer Strider. Yeah, so they're saying that he very well could be ready to go opening day. Now, without expanding on why, they said, however, we may hold him back as late as early June. Doesn't say if things go wrong, doesn't say if he's not ready for opening day. They're flat out saying they might hold him back, is the way I'm reading that. And that would be a load management, right? Let's just give him more time to recover. If we think we can be good enough for the first couple of the months of the season without him, and he gets us then to the postseason, we have him still performing at his peak when we get to the postseason. That will be their goal. And if they think that's how they're going to do it, then that changes things completely. I was looking at, I believe he was drafted, the NFBC's posting draft boards, the draft champions, 15 team drafting holds are being drafted. The first one I saw, Strider was drafted in the first 6 rounds, I believe. I don't have that one pulled up, but I'm fairly certain I remember seeing that he was drafted. He was not in the most recent one I'm looking at now, was not drafted amongst the first 90 picks. If he does indeed go opening day, there's going to be 15 guys that are really upset they didn't grab Spencer Strider. But if he does wait till June, then we are looking at somewhere between, but I could still see him getting drafted in the top 90 picks if we knew we were getting him back the 1st of June, but not much earlier than that.
I mean, I'm talking about looking. You mentioned it 2 rounds ago in our 12-teamer mock draft, and that we ended up taking DeGrom instead, and Ohtani instead. Strider's still on the board on the next round. I had no problem grabbing Strider in that format specifically, regardless of the timeline. And I almost hope he gets pushed back to June in the head-to-head format because I have no problem with him being at mid-season form in September. where obviously he'll make the most difference down the stretch for you in those kind of formats. Um, Obviously, it makes a huge difference missing, the first, 2.5 months of the season in a roto league where you sit without an IL slot, and you're just, you have one less roster spot in the first 2 months of the season to churn and stream through and kind of figure out what you want to do with that spot. But you usually have a spot or two where you're stashing somebody at any given time in an NFBC format. So maybe it's not the worst thing to obviously grab them even higher than you would normally want to grab somebody who's not going to start the season healthy, knowing that you're going to draft the rest of the way with that on your shoulder. Like, you all need to think about that as you're drafting. I've already kind of filled my unofficial stash spot on my bench for the first 2 months of the season. Draft accordingly, and obviously don't weight that too heavily in those situations. You got some more interesting guys. Again, I took the low hanging fruit there, obviously, with Strider, which was nice because you left it there for me, so I had to pick it. You already had these other two guys listed on the list, so why do these guys stand out to you?
Yeah, the K's were there, and it's just some bad luck with wins. I mean, they were fine. In fact, Logan Gilbert is who I have listed first, led the league in innings pitched, 208 and 2/3 innings. Workhorse, up from his 190 in 2023, 185 2022.
Can I
So
can I
he
can I
just
can I
continues
interrupt
to
a little
build
bit?
at 27 years old. Yeah.
What's disappointing in that statement you just made is that the leader of the league in innings pitched was at 208. Like, I understand there's less pitchers now that are going 200 plus innings. It just seems that just to barely get over that 200 and be the leader in the league in innings pitch is just disappointing.
Yeah.
Like, I
And
mean,
then
it is what
and
it
then
is. I
that
get it, but
leader doesn't get double digit wins,
yeah, yeah.
right? And he performed just fine. It wasn't him. In fact, his K minus BB was the best of his career. It was up to 22.8%, right? We're approaching elite K minus BB there. And to not get double digit wins when you're the league leader in innings pitched and that effective when you do pitch, it's we talk about it every offseason, and we will leading up to 2025. The wins category is so difficult because things like this happen.
Yeah. I mean, and a lot of and Uncle Ted's right. It's like, managers are you are seeing more pitchers getting pulled earlier, load management, as you mentioned, stuff like that. I get that. But I wonder how much of this was also due to the Seattle bullpen ruining games for Gilbert, even though he went deep enough into these games. He still threw 200 innings, you know what I mean? So he wasn't getting pulled in the fifth inning a whole lot throughout the course of the season. And so, it's something I didn't look into, and I will after this though, because I'm curious how many of those was he in line to get the win, and then just didn't get the decision because the bullpen blew it for him. That's the situation you have to consider when you're streaming wins and also drafting for wins, or as you say, chasing wins throughout your draft as well. It's not always up to the starting pitcher whether or not they get the win or not. And then you have one more guy on here that was a surprise name to put on here because it's like how much based on his recent history, how much expectation could you possibly have for Andrew Heaney? But regardless, obviously still a disappointment in many ways.
Yeah. So I am disappointed when you give me 160 innings, 31 starts. So you're averaging over 5 innings a start. I know that's a very low a standard there, but I do expect more than 5 wins. When that's what I'm getting from you, and you look at his game log, right? The the games that he didn't go 5 innings were the games he pitched poorly. right? He gave up a lot of run. He gave up 7, so he was only in there for 4 innings. He gave up 4 for 4 innings, 3 in 4 innings, 6 in 4 innings, right? I'm only reading the stats where he didn't go at least 5 innings. 3 earned runs in 4 innings, right? So and now we're back to April. So he was going out there giving us innings, giving us a strikeout an inning. He was barely under. I think, yeah, 159 strikeouts, 160 innings. We might have expected a few more, but when I'm getting a strikeout an inning and a 4.28 overall ERA, when I know a bunch of that ERA is in the handful of games that he pitched poorly. He pitched well in the games that he went long enough to qualify for a win. I expect more than 5 in 31 starts for Andrew Heaney.
Yeah, Heaney had an opportunity to like get even more wins with the the follower or the piggyback role that he had for quite a while as well. And
Oh, yeah, earlier in May. Yeah.
yeah, so if Texas had just left him in that kind of a role, obviously maybe we can get a little bit higher than what he finished with those opportunities, even if he was pitch. But to your point earlier, the games where he didn't go deep into the game were because of his own doing. So that very well may not have mattered. The whole idea of chasing, Nick Pollock will talk about this all the time. It's like chasing those wins from the followers isn't as foolproof as I think a lot of people make it out to be. Like, oh yes, the opportunity goes up because they don't have to go 5 innings; they can just go 3 or 4. But their team still has to put them in a position to get the win during that short period of time that they're going to be pitching, and they need to not shoot themselves in the foot. And Andrew Heaney did plenty of that in those short stints. And I do not foresee that changing anytime soon going into 2025. He will
And
always.
both of these guys pitch for teams whose offense is disappointed this year as well. That's huge.
Absolutely. All right, we'll move into, we got 2 more pitching categories. And then, of course, my favorite category, the wild card, to close us out here. And we'll get into our ratios right after this quick break. All right, Kevin. You got 3 names that, as you mentioned, were all back to back to back as you were looking up your possibilities of adding to this list. So I'm going to let you take all 3 of these guys all together, and then I'll throw my guys in here as well. I'm going to throw one guy. I think I'm going to add one more. No, yeah, I'll add one more in there because it's kind of they kind of go together. But talk to me about the trio here that were disappointing in the ratio category.
Yeah, I put the trio down because when I was looking at earned auction dollars, these 3 guys were all right next to each other, right around $4 is what they each earned in 2024, much less than what it cost to acquire them. Pablo Lopez, Zach Gallen, Freddie Peralta. All of these guys were disappointing in some way, and I think much of it has to do with their ratios. And a high 3s ERA and a 1.21 WHIP isn't horrible, but it's not what we expect from these guys. And in Pablo Lopez's case, his ERA was over 4. Now it came down drastically the second half. It had been above 5 and approaching 6. He had a good second half, and he got us the 15 wins. It was kind of a flip from 2023 when we were wondering, why does Pablo Lopez only have 11 wins as well as he's pitching? He got the wins this year, and the ratios weren't there. Gallen, in and out of the lineup a couple of times, banged up, and probably led to some of this. And the same with Freddie Peralta. But it was the ratios that led to each of these 3 not earning nearly what it cost to acquire them in draft season.
Yeah, I mean, this is why we do it this way. It's like, of course, you can still get the 15 wins and be valuable overall, but you really drafted somebody like Pablo with the expectation that he was going to be a 4 category stud across the board, and for him to, not be useful in at least 2 of those categories, if not harmful in at least one of them, not what we're looking for. Obviously, makes it a disappointing season overall when you expect so much more. Interesting names I'm going to throw in here is because the same exact thing we're talking about. Like, they were very useful in at least one category, but almost at the detriment to your ratios because you couldn't pull these guys out. I'm alluding to Alexis Diaz of the Cincinnati Reds and Kyle Finnegan of the Washington Nationals. Obviously, with 30 plus saves for both of them, Finnegan at 38. You were never taking these guys out. Regardless of whether their teams were good or bad, they're still getting you the category you drafted them for. But it was hurting you. It was actively hurting you in the ratios. Kyle Finnegan with 63 in 2/3 innings with a finish the season 3.68 ERA overall at the end of the season. Fine, whatever. It didn't hurt you in most scenarios because that 63 innings still is not going to make as much of a dent as if it was 163 innings from a starter. But the 1.34 whip, one of the highest from an active closer throughout the course of the season, even at 63 and 2/3 innings, not doing you any favors and actively actually hurting you, and you can't do anything about it. And so Diaz in a very similar boat, finished the season with I think it was a 3.99 ERA, just shy of the 4 mark in the ERA department for Alexis Diaz, and his whip right around that same mark as Finnegan at 1.30 in 56 and a third innings. Again, not 156. Granted, I get that. Could be 3 times as worse, but still 56 innings that are going to impact you and kind of chip away or chip at those ratios throughout the course of the season. You can't do anything about it. So disappointing in that fact. Obviously, they provided more value. And I correct myself, Diaz finished the season just shy of 30, 28 stolen bases, 28 saves on the season. Still extremely valuable because you were getting all those. You were taking the bad with the good while doing it as well. So and plus, we usually talk about relievers in this category anyway, so I had to throw in some disappointing relievers in that situation. And it's easy to pick out disappointing pitchers that didn't actually hurt you because they were, relievers that you were streaming in and out, and maybe you only used them in your lineup for 1 or 2 weeks. These guys were in your lineup all year. So you got all of that 3.99 ERA from Alexis Diaz, guaranteed, unless you dropped them at the very end of the year because you had saves locked down and you weren't worried about it. But still, you probably only missed out on the last couple weeks of the season in that situation. So, and that will lead us right into the saves category, Kevin,
where I have very similar players to what you were just talking about. In fact, right, Alexis Diaz was still worth $1.50 in a 15-team Roto League.
Sure.
Bednar and Doval were both negative. They, in fact, did hurt your team in spite of each of them gave us 23 saves. But a 4.88 ERA from Doval and a 5.77 ERA and approaching those 60 innings pitched, just like Alexis Diaz, they were actually detrimental to our teams in spite of the saves they provided.
At least with Bednar, the Pirates finally came out and said, maybe he's not our closer anymore. It was a little late in the season.
Doval too.
Doval got demoted.
Yeah.
And again, but there was at least it wasn't until the moment that they finally demoted him, though, that you knew. And so, yeah, the same situation I was talking about with Finnegan and with Diaz.
You're running them out there.
You're running them out there. You got
saves.
every part of those ratios until they were demoted. And when Doval came back, obviously he didn't make his way back into many lineups because he never got the job back. And Bednar also didn't finish the season as well with the job. So at least at the end of the season, you missed out on all of that. But leading up to that mark, same exact boat. Absolutely. And then
so a 4.88 ERA, right, for 60-ish innings.
I don't think
right.
That's good.
Lots of times we've said this, but things get bad enough to where things we said will admit, no, not in this case, right? We've said many times, if you're getting the saves, that's all I care about from these guys in the ninth inning, right? But once it gets that bad, not even the 5.77, just 4.88, 60 innings. If 3.5 is our target for our ERA, right? From A 4.88 ERA for 60 innings is the same as a 4.19 ERA for 120 innings. That just really makes it seem like
Yeah.
no way would I want a guy in there with a 4.2 ERA for 120 innings. So why would I want that 4.88 for 60 innings just to get my 23 saves? The answer should be I wouldn't. And that's a change I'm going to make to my philosophy. Now, fortunately, I didn't have Bednar or Duvall or Alexis Diaz on any of my teams. But it's something I really want to keep an eye on. If guys are throwing up a high ERA and still getting saves, I'm going to try to get them out of my lineup. And in the past, I probably would not have.
Yeah, fair enough. Last guy I'll throw out here, and it's funny. I'm looking through the ADP list just to make sure I knew where he was, and then I'm like, I can't help but notice all the names we literally just talked about right around this player. And again, this is saves category, so I'm talking about a reliever. Evan Phillips is the name that popped out to me, but then as I look around in the ADP, so Phillips was at 97 in March, 97th overall. Bednar was at 95. Right above him, a couple spots, Andres Munoz, another, arguably disappointing reliever as well. A couple picks, and then a couple picks right before him was Alexis Diaz at 85. And so there's a whole lot of terribleness or at least disappointment. I should just stick with the theme of the episode, right? There's a whole lot of disappointment right before this 100 marker in ADP. Pete Fairbanks comes in right after that as well. So, like, as far as relievers go, this was not a safe spot to end up drafting in retrospect, hindsight 2020 and all that good stuff. But I mean, Phillips on the Dodgers, and still, being, the official or unofficial closer throughout most of the season, and still only racking you up 18 saves for that kind of a team and that kind of a situation has got to be, as disappointing as it comes. Didn't hurt you didn't hurt you really at all in the ratios when he was out there. You just never knew if he was going to get the save opportunity. You didn't know if they were going to throw Daniel Hudson out there. Now Michael Kopech is in the mix in the second half of the season. And so I don't know what to expect out of 2025. One thing I do not expect is for Phillips to be the closer, or maybe even like the top choice going into 25. What's this? Is this a situation the team is too good for you to avoid, or is there just too much gray area for it to matter?
I think it is typically a team I would consider too good to avoid. I would try to figure it out. Doesn't mean I can, and it doesn't mean that that draft any of the guys I think it will be, depending on where they're being drafted. But it's a situation I try to figure out. It's been kind of rough for a few years.
Sure. That has not been like, and I just listed off like these are guys that a lot of teams, because it's in the top 100 or 110 picks overall, are your first reliever on your team, your RP1, if you will. In some situations, yeah, these guys are your RP2s. Maybe you kind of push the relievers up again once again, but for the most part, these are guys that you expect to be starting and quote safe. And obviously not one of the names I listed off there was that for you this year. All right, we'll finish it off here, Kevin, with our wild card section. And I'm gonna go right into it after this break. All right, sorry, I had to do that. I had to get that one more break in there. We're gonna finish it out here with the wild card section, everybody. It's my favorite part. Because I'm always interested to see the names that Kevin throws out there. So I'm going to let that simmer a little bit, and I'll throw out my first two names. And I tried to stick with the same kind of theme as last week, where we looked at these rookies. So I went in that same realm. Both of these guys rookie eligible, still expected to get the opportunity, still expected to perform. Wyatt Langford is the first one that comes to mind, just because all the hype, everything expected, especially when you knew he was going to start opening day. It was a very Jordan Walker situation. All the hype behind it, and then didn't land flat on his face, but he took a really long time to get rolling. So much so, led to a very short demotion, similarly to Jordan Walker last year as well, and this year for that matter. And so I think just the fact that we always say like these guys don't usually get rolling right away. There's a lot of growing pains. There's a lot to learn, especially in Langford's situation, coming up so young with such little experience at the professional level. It shouldn't have come as a surprise. It didn't make it any less disappointing, at least to start. He didn't finish the season with a terrible line overall, and a lot of people are going to be excited for him in 2025, rightfully so. But there was definitely some situations where Langford was either outright dropped or just benched tremendously after that slow start, that you might have missed out on any of the added goodness as he kind of ramped himself up throughout the season. And then the other one is Tristan Casas, who obviously injury riddled situation for him, but was in line to be that guy for my Red Sox and just did not get that opportunity again due to the injuries. I get that, but that injury really seemed to linger and linger and linger. He had that amazingly excruciating quote out there about how he felt like somebody was stabbing him in his ribs just when he turned his body. And I'm paraphrasing obviously, but like it hurt to read it, never mind hear him say it. And so just obviously finally made his way back toward the end of the season. And I will be interested in investing in Tristan Casas going into 2025. Kevin, we talked about this right before we started recording. Like this will be one of our late first base targets, as long as he stays going late in drafts, especially the one the mock draft we're doing right now. It would be somebody that I'm perfectly fine, sitting on for a while. Do you expect Langford to continue, moving forward with what we saw by the end of the season? And same thing at Casas. I mean, is the injuries behind him as far as you're concerned when considering drafting a power hitting first baseman in your drafts going into 2025?
I think so. I will be interested in seeing what Casas looks like when we see him swinging a bat in February. But if he looks comfortable, then I'm going to be fine with it. He did make it back by the end of the season. Hopefully, that means he's completely 100% healthy. I think this was a very fluky injury. We remember his quotes about it that you were paraphrasing earlier.
Oh my God.
So, yeah, I'm right there with you on Casas. And Wyatt Langford, you mentioned the slow start, but he finished as hot as he started slow. And in between was a very mixed bag, but mostly slow. He had 8 home runs and 7 stolen bases in September. So he got to pretty close to a 2020 rookie season in spite of having 4 home runs at the end of June and 7 stolen bases. But it all happened in September,
Yeah.
right? He had a pretty good June. He hit 309, had 3 home runs and 6 stolen bases. He didn't hit over 238 any other month of the season. Just June and September. That's it. And those 2 months he hit so well that it pulled his overall numbers up to over 250 on the year. So he's really young. He's 22 years old. I think it is an opportunity in many drafts that he will be drafted much later than Jackson Merrill and Jackson Churio. However, not as much later as I was hoping. The most recent draft and hold, NFBC Draft Champions League that I was looking at the draft board earlier. Yeah, Jackson Merrill went the 4th pick of the 3rd round. Jackson Churio, mid-second round. That's where these guys are going. Now, coming into this season, Wyatt Langford, I think, was very similar to these guys, and we could have mixed them all into one big bunch. He's going less than 2 rounds later than Jackson Merrill. Early 5th round is where he went in this particular draft. I would have thought a little later. I think that September is probably going to push him up higher than he should be. While I think that he is uh, a valuable piece to add later in a draft that could be very similar to Churio and Merrill. I don't know if just 2 rounds is enough when I look at the overall production he gave us. Once again, only 22 years old, and once again, that September is very encouraging. I'm just afraid that now, other people I'm drafting against are gonna put a lot more stock in that September than I am, and so, I'm not gonna end up with much of Wyatt Langford, although I'd like him on my rosters.
Yeah, he went 5 picks after Merrill in this mock draft that we're doing here, where Merrill went at 12 teamer again. He went at the end of the 3rd round. We picked Schwarber, and then right after that, Langford went. Churio went a whole round prior to Merrill in that draft. And so yeah, obviously that drop in Langford, whether it's name recognition, hype, is still very much so there. And we talked about this before. When you pick and choose, the first half, second half, or even 1 month period, it's the month at the very end that usually people they hold on to the tightest, because assuming it will just continue to flow into the beginning of the season, as if there aren't like 5 months in between September and April or March, even when you're looking at spring training. It's like those months don't exist. It's like, oh, we're obviously just going to keep going with that. And a lot of times it does. Sure, I get it. There's actual growth. There's actual changes that you can and you make, and things you can learn from. But it's not as though those months don't exist. A lot of stuff can still happen. Great. Speaking of which, we are up. We just became up
I
in
see
that
that.
draft, Kevin. We did, like I said, we took DeGrom and Ohtani before that. I am tempted to throw Strider in there as a 3rd SP. But I wonder if
I
we
say
could
we do it. We have 3 aces, and we didn't draft them until the 6th, 7th, and 8th
round.
round.
I also want to roll the dice. I'm like, I wonder if we could get them after the turn. But why risk it?
I think PL might be make a jump here, and he's got 2 before we have another one.
You're right. You're right. PL, you can't trust the PL bot robot. All right. So as I look to see if I can throw that in there, hit me with your wild card spots to end us out here.
So taking advantage of the off season, and like we've been talking for a couple of weeks, some players we don't typically get to talk about. So I'm taking advantage of this. One, I don't think it's much of a surprise to most people. Marcus Simeon's numbers down a bit, still 4th straight season, actually 5th straight, because we'll skip 2020. 5th straight season of over 700 plate appearances, and that's where a lot of his value comes from. Even when he's not hitting 45 home runs like he did in 2021, he's only got 14 less runs scored because he comes to the plate as a leadoff hitter so often. So he's still got over 100 runs scored, but his RBIs were way down into the 70s from 100 last season. 6 less home runs, 6 less stolen bases. There's still some value here, but the batting average was down to what we saw in 2020, down to a 237 batting average, 23 home runs, 8 stolen bases. It's and like we talked last week and earlier in this show, he's still going to be a fairly early pick due to the lack of second baseman available
Mhm.
to us. But he will be he's 34 years old, just turned 34 years old last month. So at some point, he's not getting 700 plate appearances anymore. That could very easily be 2025. And we're to the point now where he needs those 700 plate appearances to hold his value. So I am worried about Marcus Simeon. That probably doesn't surprise many people. This one might. I'm also worried about Bryce Harper. I don't know if people realize how bad his second half was, because the Phillies lineup as a whole was much worse in the second half than it was in the first half of the season. And it's first half, second half, which, break up any half of the games they played you want, and see what happens, right? I get that. But this was a huge drop off. He only
Mhm.
had 9 home runs and 274 plate appearances in the second half. He hit 266 after hitting 301 in the first half with 21 home runs. So there's something here. I don't think it's just the Phillies lineup. I don't think it's just that he was banged up. He was pulling the ball less, I noticed. That's been a common theme on these guys that are down in power a little bit, pulling the ball less. He's about to be 32 years old. He's got, I believe, 7 years left on his 13-year contract. There's a lot of money still going to be paid for Bryce Harper, and he's going to continue to hit a lot of home runs. He got to 30 this season, but this is something I'm going to want to dig into quite a bit deeper and see if he's the first round draft pick where he's being drafted in most leagues. The overall numbers were great. Second half, definitely not so. Definitely something I'm uh, intrigued by and concerned by until I can hopefully find some answers. But Bryce Harper was not good in the second half, not even good.
He also wasn't good ultimately when he came back last year either. So second half, if you want to look at it that way as well, at least in the power, especially in the power categories. So obviously this year, not because of coming back from an injury per se, you can't really lean on that. There's had to be either something really lingering, or just something that he's worried about, and he had to make an adjustment after the injury that's obviously impacted the overall production, or at least the power categories, which is what you're really focusing on, with Bryce Harper in this situation as well. Um, so yeah, I mean, he was a turn pick, even last year. If I double check, that March ADP, if my Control F will work for me. Let's see, Harper. Where's Harper? Yeah, 17th overall ADP in March last year across all drafts. So arguably still, he went on the turn in plenty of 15 teamers, possibly even a 12 teamer here or there as well. But I'd be hard pressed to see him going, definitely at that turn in most other situations. As we saw him go all the way down into, oh geez, where did he even go in this draft? This situation, Harper. Oh, he went. What was this pick? He went at the back
He
of the
was the
second round.
third first baseman taken. Yeah,
Yeah, right
that
before Pete
pick.
Alonso, and
He
right
was
after Freddie Freeman.
21. In the draft and hold, he was taken 12th overall, on that board that I've been referring to throughout the show, where
Somebody's very confident he'll come back from this.
he was the first baseman taken in that draft. Vladimir Guerrero went to the same person that drafted Harper. They went Harper, Guerrero to start their draft. Freeman then went later in the second round, and Matt Olson, the last pick of the second round, as compared to our draft, where Vladimir Guerrero was the first baseman taken, Freddie Freeman second, and Bryce Harper third.
Yeah. I want to know what the nickname will be to start off your draft, 1-1. First base, first base. I love all the different nicknames, that John Fish comes up with. I don't give him all the credit. I'm sure he hasn't come up with all of them. But I do like the ABCs one. And
Yeah,
then, Pocket Aces, obviously, we hear about all the time. And a couple other options. I want to know what the nickname is for starting your draft off with two first basemen back to back. So if you got a suggestion, throw it out there on Twitter, tag us on it, because I'll just, not that I will pick a winner. I'm just curious to know what people can come up with in that situation.
If it wasn't for the fact that he's probably doing basketball drafts right now, I'd say it might have been John Fish that
Yeah,
did it.
just to say he did. One of my favorite ones came. I don't know if it was last year or the last year's drafts or the year before. The Yellow Brick Road, where you just start your draft all
He actually,
was was
John Fish is in a draft because he started 4 yellows in a
But no,
draft.
the thing is, you have to go. Then you have to go 3 outfielders because you're going to the Emerald City. So you got to go
Mhm.
all pitchers until you, and then you fill up your outfield. And then you can fill up the rest of the rainbow. And so hopefully, if somebody does that, and we're going to see draft boards on our inner feeds for constantly for the next couple months. I will like to see a true over the rainbow. So that would be all yellow going into green and then rainbow the rest of the way. Please, somebody make it happen. There's a lot of other side quests that you can go down. You can draft all the Diaz's. You can draft all the players that have the same last name, or what have you. But this is the side quest that I'm putting on somebody else because I won't be able to do it. All right. Well, that is there's unfortunately a lot of disappointing players that we just talked about, Kevin. Hopefully they're not as much of a disappointment next year. There will be some. Hopefully we can maneuver our way through drafts to avoid as many of them as possible, though it will be hard to avoid them all. Why don't you close us out with hopefully a more positive note that we can take into our very early drafts going into mid-October. Unfortunately, you can't close it out by celebrating as your Royals were eliminated today as a final score of 3-1. Unfortunately, we are going to see the Yankees go off, and hopefully, I don't know who you're rooting for on the other side. I'm going to say hopefully, just because I like the story, the Tigers end up facing off in New York in the ALCS because I want to see that. Sorry to all our Cleveland fans out there. I will have no problem if they win this as well. I just would like to see that. So, Kevin, any final thoughts to
That's
leave
where
us
I'm
with?
at. That's
Yeah.
where I'm at. I'd prefer the Tigers, but either the Tigers or Guardians, I'll be rooting for against the Yankees. Very excited for the National League Game 5
Mm-hmm.
tomorrow to see who's going to face the Mets. That's going to be a fun game. Um, I was looking so to prepare for this show. I many of the players, not everybody. I had some guys that were drafted later, but a lot of these guys came from early rounds, and that's going to be the easiest spots to find disappointments. But I took the top 100 from 2024 main event ADP, and then added a column with the auction dollars that they earned in 2024, and only 15 of the top 50 of those that were drafted in the top 100. This is the top 100 main event ADP.
Mm-hmm.
Only 15 of the top 50, top half earners were pitchers. 5 of those 15 were relievers. So only 10 starting pitchers that were drafted in the top 100 are in the top half of those 100 in what they earned. And I think this, Uncle Ted has put this in on this show. He says something about it nearly every week in the chat about not taking starters early. And it's hard when we think we know who the elite guy is. We think we're going to get the same Tariq Skubal in 2025 we got in 2024. Somebody's taking Skubal in the first round. And as far as our track record and what we're good at doing, we are not good at drafting the correct elite pitchers. Now, often that's due to injury. We can't predict that, but that's just another element in it. And I think Uncle Ted, I've done this in the past, and I thought I needed to get to the point where I was willing to push pitchers up because that's what happens in main event drafts. I thought that's what I needed to do. I'm not so sure now. Uncle Ted likes to say just draft a whole bunch of number 3 starters. I'm kind of in that range. The reason I preferred auctions for so many years is I could get 6 $15 pitchers. Those are typically teams number 2s. In some cases, they're number 1s for the team that they play for. and you can get 6 of them in an auction. That's very, very hard to do in a snake draft because you'd be wanting to draft them all the same round.
Exactly.
Right?
Exactly.
So, but maybe pushing some of those guys up a round or even 2 so you can get more than one of them, and earlier you're spending those picks on hitters, on a reliever, on a catcher. I think that there's really something to this. Just historically, including 2024, looking at it already, we are not good as a community at drafting the correct elite pitchers.
Was this a recording? I feel like this was just a recording of last year, a very similar rant. It's just
I
you're
don't
right.
recall saying it at all last
We're
year.
just
Did I say the same
maybe not
thing? I
you.
sure as heck didn't follow through on it.
I meant really, really that one of the last things you just said. It's like we are not good as as a community, as a group of people who draft fantasy baseball at picking the collectively the right elite starting pitchers.
Well, Ron Chandler says it every year in the Baseball Forecaster about the number 1 overall player, and we were wrong again.
Yeah.
Both of them. The one that took over for the one that we stopped drafting number
Yeah, that's
1.
right.
They both missed a year, right?
Unfortunately, also playing on the same major league team as well, so not not helping anybody in their situations. But yeah, let's just do better. In general, it sums it up. Let's all just do better. And that is going to sum it up for episode 184 of On the Wire. Thank you for joining us, and we'll be here as often as possible. Planning on being here every single Sunday on the podcast side, and we'll be recording. And when we do record, we record live on YouTube. No set schedule on that, so you just have to be like Uncle Ted and just join us when you see us pop up there. And we would appreciate it if you did. Until then, though, I am Adam Howe on behalf of Kevin Hasting. Thanks for listening, and we bid you goodbye.